Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Tuesday, November the 9th, 2021. As per Microsoft introduction standards, I should probably point out, from the beginning that I am a Caucasian male. I'm wearing a check jacket, a brown tie, and a white button-down shirt. My apologies for there being no show yesterday. The reason for this was, as I mentioned on Friday, that the lawyer in charge of my father's estate has been ducking calls and emails for about a month. And so since I live in the city where the lawyer works, I thought that I would doorstop him at his office, but that proved to be unsuccessful. Apparently, I have an appointment to speak to him a week Thursday. This was all supposed to be wrapped up by the middle of October. It is not wrapped up. And well, the amount of money that I'm supposed to get from the estate, it's not an enormous amount of money. It's not going to make me rich, but it will, let's say, remove the terror of imminent homelessness for, say, 18 months, something like that, which is why I'm so eager to get a hold of it. In other news, I am, I don't know, maybe as close as this to moving on to another live streaming platform, which will be Odyssey. And I believe the difficulty of getting enough tokens in order to enable chat on the live stream is dealt with, or will shortly be dealt with. I'm not making any promises, but I certainly hope to get this going this week so that there will be no more Crypsis casts. And hello to Emmett Kelly's Earth, Anren Palcaso 88, Dan, Dawn from Beyond, No Sleep Till Breezewood, Pennsylvania, William Hicks, Yo Mama. No, doorstop is Anren. Doorstop is it's a term from journalism. Basically, you show up at someone's doorstop because, when you open your door, then you'll be forced to speak to me. If the show lasts another 18 months, we're going to make it, says No Sleep. That's rather cryptic in itself. So where do we start today? How about starting with a word to the wise? You notice that the vaccinators, who of course have science on their side and the experts on their side, so they are right. They're right in whatever they tell us, whatever they compel us to do, but they do seem to be becoming a little desperate. This is from AB's Substack. Pfizer, about an hour and a half ago, made a strange tweet. It's easy to get distracted by misinformation these days, but don't worry, science has got your back. And so we have a picture of the human brain, this sort of gray alien creature, grasping at a balloon that says wild conspiracy theories. And then this is lower down in this illustration, the human brain, which is now sweating, is being held rather firmly by a pink hot dog labeled science. Yes, universal mental retardation. But more from Pfizer, which, of course, another reason to love Pfizer is because it would seem that without Pfizer's advertising, cable news would not exist. This just in, Pfizer CEO, people who spread misinformation on COVID-19 vaccines are criminals. That's a direct quote. So is spread misinformation and have cost, quote, millions of lives, unquote. How about that? How about that? Paul Joseph Watson on Summit News writes, during an appearance at the globalist Washington, D.C. based think tank Atlantic Council, Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla blamed a very small group of people for circulating information that leads to people being vaccine hesitant. He told Atlantic Council CEO Frederick Kemp, quote, these people are criminals. They're not bad people. They're criminals because they have literally cost millions of lives. Well, generally, as a rule, criminals are bad people, but never mind that. Bourla went on to suggest that life would only get, quote, back to normal once the unvaccinated have been vaccinated. The only thing that stands between the new way of life and the current way of life is, frankly, hesitancy to vaccinations. Are any of you disturbed by this talk of the new way of life? The increasing shift towards demonizing people who question the safety and efficacy of vaccines are not just conspiracy theories, but actual criminals who deserve prison time, is accelerating, Watson comments. As we previously highlighted, the UK government is trying to pass a new law that would jail people who post so-called false information about vaccines for 2 years. Treating people who question billionaires that own transnational corporations responsible for $3 billion in corruption penalties as criminals is surely good for society, right? A similar process is in play when it comes to those who question the official dogma spewed by climate change technocrats. Before long, people won't just receive social media bans for questioning orthodoxy, they'll just be sent straight to prison. So what do we know? What do we know about Pfizer's legal issues? Well, this is from Wikipedia. Under aggressive pharmaceutical marketing, Pfizer has been accused of that. And list of largest pharmaceutical settlements. Well, number one is GlaxoSmithKline, which in 2012 paid $3 billion, $1 billion criminal, $2 billion civil. And Pfizer, 2009, comes in second at $2.3 billion off-label promotion kickbacks for such products as Bextra, Geodon, Zyvox, and Lyrica. Johnson & Johnson, another vaccine maker, is in third place with a $2.2 billion fine for off-label promotion and kickbacks related to Risperdal, Invega, and Nesritide. Then we have Abbott, Eli Lilly, etc., etc., etc. But let's go back to Pfizer. In 1993, the Food and Drug Administration approved a gabapentin only for treatment of seizures. Warner Lambert, which merged with Pfizer in 2000, used continuing medical education and medical research, sponsored articles about the drug for the medical literature, and alleged suppression of unfavorable study results to promote gabapentin. Within 5 years, the drug was being widely used for off-label uses such as treatment of pain and psychiatric conditions. Warner Lambert admitted to violating FDA regulations by promoting the drug for pain, psychiatric conditions, migraine, and other unapproved uses. In September 2009, Pfizer pleaded guilty to the illegal marketing of arthritis drug valdecoxib, or Bextra, and agreed to the aforementioned $2.3 billion settlement, the largest healthcare fraud the largest healthcare fraud settlement at that time. Peter Rost was vice president in charge of the endocrinology division at Pharmacia before its acquisition by Pfizer. During that time, he raised concerns internally about kickbacks and off-label marketing of Genotropin, Pharmacia's human growth hormone drug. Pfizer reported that Pharmacia marketing practices to the FDA and Department of Justice. Rost was unaware of this and filed an FCA lawsuit against Pfizer. Pfizer kept him employed but isolated him until the FCA suit was unsealed in 2005. The Justice Department declined to intervene. Pfizer filed him, and he filed a wrongful termination suit. Pfizer won a summary dismissal of the case, with the court ruling that the evidence showed Pfizer had decided to fire Rost prior to learning of his whistleblower activities. Illegal marketing, removal of, according to Harper's Magazine publisher John R. MacArthur, Pfizer withdrew between $400,000 and $1 million worth of ads from Harper's Magazine following an unflattering article on depression medication. And one wonders how badly cable news would be hurt if Pfizer decided to withdraw the many millions of dollars if people were to, I don't know, say the wrong thing, misinformation about the pandemic. As Max Taibbi said with regard to the Bank of America, it's just, no, not the Bank of America, sorry, my apologies, JP Morgan Chase, it's a criminal company. And these stupendous fines that JP Morgan is regularly assessed, it's just a cost of business. But let's get to Canada. There is a pisser to copy in my country called Susan Riley, who's been around forever. She has a piece in the Hill Times called Political Response to Anti-Vaxxers Too Slow, Too Deferential. Yes, because telling people they're not going to be able to travel, not going to be able to go to restaurants, nightclubs, not going to be able to go to theaters, not going to be able to eat on patios outdoors, not going to be allowed to travel, and yeah, you'll lose your job. That is Susan Riley's belief of what deferential means. It is long past time, she thunders, that governments, institutions, unions, corporations, school boards, especially healthcare providers, but basically anyone who delivers a public service, stopped cowering in the face of anti-vaxxers, stopped trying to reason with ill-informed or bad-tempered zealots, stopped extending deadlines and watering down regulations to suit the obstinate and the ignorant. Enough with both sidesism, with attempts at balance. Science and evidence versus harebrained social media quackery is not a debate worth indulging. Enough, too, with the elaborate delicacy with which vaccine resistors have been treated, the gentle encouragement from premiers and their medical officers of health to get shots in lieu of mandatory deadlines. Alberta even offered cash bribes to induce people to do the right thing. And of course, it never occurred to Susan Riley that governments offering cash bribes on top of the bullying that we will hurt you if you do not get jabbed and now jabbed again might say something about the procedure itself. It might just, because it seems to me that, oh, here is this wonderful new medicine which is going to protect us and protect others from the modern plague. Well, of course, everyone is going to get it, especially since they're giving it away for free. So why are some still hesitant? Riley continues, so much too for spineless politicians. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole, who won't even disclose the vaccination status of his MPs, springs to mind, who acknowledge they have received the shots themselves, who earnestly urge their co-citizens to do the same, but in the next breath are ready to give people the choice of an effective vaccine or expensive and uncertain frequent testing. And what happens when the anti-vaxxers set up a howl against forced testing? Except for the tiny group for whom vaccines are medically dangerous, or for those increasingly rare individuals who want a shot but haven't been able to access one, everyone should be at least single-vaxxed by now, and in most cases double-vaxxed. As it stands, we're only 88% there with the first dose and 84% with the second. That still leaves room for COVID to flourish. This should not be a controversial issue. Polls repeatedly show a large majority of Canadians support vaccines. After a year and a half and millions of vaccines administered worldwide, there has been a statistically insignificant number of bad reactions. Like theirs reporting 10,000 deaths in the United States? Is that statistically insignificant? I suppose it may be statistically insignificant, given how many people have had it. But of course, theirs isn't exactly an efficient system for reporting side effects and deaths because it is not mandatory. But no, so now 10,000 people dying afterwards. Pfft, screw those people. Then there is the small matter of protecting the vulnerable. Instead of engaging in bogus arguments about the so-called violation of the rights of vaccine resistors, this high-handed trampling of our so-called freedom to become desperately ill and to infect others, government should be defending the parents, children, grandparents, and others threatened by the stunning selfishness of the few. I always think when I come across a paragraph like that, what did Susan Riley and all these other people have to say about AIDS at the time? Because the people who got AIDS were responsible for getting it, because it was well known how AIDS was spread. And yet a certain group of people, which I will not name, decided to simply ignore it and go ahead with their dangerous behavior. This is, directly dangerous. All right. But let's get to the heart of the measure here. No, first of all, I'll mention Doug Ford. Ontario Premier Doug Ford last week announced that hospital staff who are not vaccinated must submit to regular COVID testing, but no testing regime or infection control measures can match a vaccine for preventing spread. Ford blamed this cowardly, complicit approach on fear of losing too many frontline employees in a sector already under pressure, which raises a pertinent question. Do we want anti-vaxxers working in a hospital setting or with vulnerable seniors? If they don't believe in modern medicine, why are they in this sector in the first place? Maybe they know a little bit more about modern medicine than Susan Riley. Ford said that he was spooked by the experience in British Columbia, where 3,000 healthcare workers refused to report for duty after a vaccine mandate was imposed. As a result, surgeries have been canceled and tests delayed, and Quebec backtracked the week before and mandated vaccinations for fear of job losses. If Ontario can bear the burden of healthcare professionals not being vaxxed, how can they possibly force this on anyone else? Insane. This response is, to put it kindly, insane, she writes. It is capitulating to the terrorists, figuratively speaking. Well, a word to the wise, Susan Riley in the Hill Times and others, like the CEO of Pfizer, might have cause to regret in the future for referring to millions of Canadians and tens of millions of Americans as criminals and terrorists. I've noticed something in the last week, a rising anger, a rage, a sense among a great many people that they've had it. This goes too far. Yes, the government has gone too far, etc., before. No, but this time they mean it. And these people are permanently alienated. Which in Canada is very important, because there is nothing holding this country together except entropy. And a government which, well, to coin a phrase, terrorizes its people is going to have a nasty surprise when it calls for sacrifices from said people. And I think we could be looking at the Pareto distribution of the 20% of the 20%. And latest news, this Rachel Gilmore from Global News, Tory MP apologizes for sharing misinformation about COVID-19 and vaccines. Conservative MP Marilyn Gladu has apologized for comments she made about vaccines and COVID-19 just one day after leader Erin O'Toole said her statements were not appropriate. During an interview with CTV's Question Period, Gladu likened COVID-19 to polio, but claimed that the coronavirus doesn't pose the same frequency of risk in terms of deaths or disabilities. Well, it's pretty clear what happened here, that Erin O'Toole, who's probably not going to be in his job for much longer, told Marilyn Gladu that she would apologize or she would be kicked out of caucus. Gladu was not included in O'Toole's shadow cabinet. Neither was Leslyn Lewis, who has also had some interesting things to say about the pandemic. And we are seeing, well, misinformation. I suppose that's the only way we can characterize it, seeping in to mainstream journals such as Newsweek and, well, no less than the Wall Street Journal. This is a story by Peter Loftus 2 days ago. As U.S. health authorities expand use of the leading COVID-19 vaccines, researchers investing heart-related risks linked to the shots are exploring several emerging theories, including one centered on the spike protein made in response to vaccination. Some theories center on the type of spike protein that a person makes in response to the mRNA vaccines. The mRNA itself or other components of the vaccines, researchers say, could also be setting off certain inflammatory responses in some people. One new theory under examination: improper injections of the vaccine directly into a vein, which sends the vaccine to heart muscle. To find answers, some doctors and scientists are running tests in lab dishes and examining heart tissue samples from people who developed myocarditis or pericarditis after being vaccinated. COVID-19 itself can cause both conditions. They have also been reported in a smaller number of people who got an mRNA vaccine, most commonly in men under 30 years and adolescent males. About 877 confirmed cases of myocarditis in vaccinated people under 30 years have been reported in the U.S. out of 86 million mRNA vaccine doses administered, according to the CDC. Oh, yes. So, in various places in the Western world, there have been lockdowns of varying severity. And in Australia and New Zealand, the lockdowns have been at various points, well, total. So I suppose it was some comfort for those of us who had our freedom stolen from us, who were continually bullied and terrified, that we still had the option to drink ourselves to death, but not so fast. This is from Steve Watson at Summit News. According to a report by NCA Newswire, Australians in lockdown are being monitored by the government with particular regards to their alcohol intake, which is now subject to restrictions by the state. The report notes that, quote, residents in apartment blocks in lockdown by New South Wales Health are having their alcohol deliveries policed as part of a policy to limit the number of drinks being consumed each day, unquote. Residents have been told that they are only allowed 6 beers or pre-mixed drinks or 1 bottle of wine per day. The report states that the justification for the policy is to control buildings and ensure the safety of health staff and residents. As if it isn't enough to already be confined to their own domiciles endlessly, even when only 1 case of COVID is registered, the government is now rummaging through deliveries to check that people are not ordering what it deems to be too much booze. The report even notes, quote, excess alcohol is being confiscated until lockdown rules are lifted. They are searching all bags and things coming into the building. They confiscated a series of gifts, so things like bottles of spirits. We weren't allowed to have those, and we still aren't. This is according to Common Ground resident Robin L. Hage. As reported earlier, Australians who have not received a COVID-19 vaccine will remain under lockdown indefinitely, while those who have been jabbed will see some of their freedoms return, with Premier Gladys Berejiklian telling unjabbed Aussies, "You have been warned." That is a quote, direct. In addition, Australian Public Health Chief Dr. Kerry Chant remarked, quote, "We will be looking at what contract tracing looks like in the new world order," unquote. Watson concludes Australia has gone from a freedom-loving country to something that more resembles North Korea in the space of 1 year. And do we have any more on this unfortunate topic? Yes. Yes, we do. And under the subject, is there anything COVID can't do? This is from The Hill. Secretary Jennifer Granholm on the rising prices of goods, quote, know that all of the economists that the president has been relying on suggest that there is a transitory nature to the inflation problem as we move through. We want to make sure we get everybody vaccinated so we can unclog the bottlenecks that we've been seeing. Yes. Yeah. It's COVID. Can't find it on the shelf. It's up 5%, 10%, 20% in price. It's those bastards who haven't been vaccinated yet. And we're going to be hearing, this is rather similar to, if you've ever read any Soviet history, the endless campaigns in the 20s and 30s against wreckers. 5-year plan not met, factory not built in time, factory produces dud inventory. It's those wreckers. And so the vaccine hesitant, who I must point out, per YouTube regulations, are completely in the wrong and deserve to be absolutely ashamed because they're not following the science. Well, they're going to be blamed for everything that goes wrong in our countries. Let's go to dailyskeptic.org, formerly Lockdown Skeptics. Scroll down here. Oh, from Sky News, a brothel in Vienna is providing COVID-19 vaccinations and giving those who take up the offer vouchers for a free visit. In exchange for a jab, visitors get a free 30-minute session in a sauna club with the lady of their choice. So now prostitution is being employed to get people jabbed. ONS reported to UK Statistics Authority by former senior employee for misleading claim that the risk of death is 32 times higher in the unvaccinated. Yes, Paul Joseph Watson was talking about that on a live stream today. James Wells had tweeted, see attached the letter I have sent to the UK Statistics Authority and the National Statistician outlining the code of practice for statistics breach by ONS. I'm genuinely disappointed. Let us hope that the remedy restores my faith in ONS. The U.S. Stats Authority, this looks to be a serious breach of the Code of Practice for Statistics. It appears that a particular time series has been selected to get a specific result concerning the risk for vaxxed versus unvaxxed from COVID. Big Brother Watch launches legal challenge against COVID passports in Wales. Singapore to deny free COVID healthcare to the unvaccinated. Well, we already knew that Singapore was one of the most authoritarian countries in the world, so no surprise there. Awkward meltdown at the UK Health Security Agency over data showing infection rate higher in vaccinated than unvaccinated. Yes, I talked about this last week, and the response of the experts, not the experts that had collected and collated the data, but, the real experts, the gods who rule our lives, was don't pay any attention to the data. We're publishing a guest post by a blogger calling himself Eugipius about the frantic attempts by the UK HSA to renounce its own data showing infection rates are higher in the vaccinated than they are in the unvaccinated. Well, it must be wrong. It must be wrong by definition, all right? The data must be wrong because we know that the jabs are highly efficacious and will remain so forever. We know that because the experts have told us, and the experts are always right. Mandatory vaccination will cause 1 in 10 care workers to lose their jobs. More than 25,000 tons. That's not the same as a ton, by the way. It's a metric ton, which is about 2,200 pounds. More than 25,000 tons of COVID-related PPE and plastic waste has been thrown into the sea. And 71% of this is due to wash up on beaches by the end of the year. From the Mail, researchers in California have developed a computer model simulating the fate of plastic waste as it leaves beaches, drifts along the water, and fragments into pieces. Most of the offending COVID-related plastic is from medical waste generated by hospitals, the researchers say, which dwarfs the contribution from PPE and packaging from online shopping giants like Amazon and eBay. More than 11,000 contracted COVID and died after being admitted to hospital. Hospital data shows that nearly 12,000 patients who were admitted to hospitals for other illnesses probably caught COVID while there and died shortly afterwards. This finding has boosted calls to implement mandatory vaccination measures for all NHS staff, with the policy becoming enforced sometime during the spring. Yes, stay out of hospitals if you can at all avoid going there, because hospitals are where people die. And okay, that's enough of that. And let's see what William Briggs, statistician to the stars, has to say today, or yesterday, actually, it turns out. No government wants or enjoys criticism, even as they all lie and say they welcome it. Further, everybody knows these two humble truths. It is only when a government decides it will not allow political criticism that a state of tyranny exists. The emphasis is on political. For example, a critic with good reason charges the government with theft over some new tax policy. The government moves to shut the critic up, perhaps by arresting him. A standard everyday regime suppression technique. That's politics. Now, let's do science. You have heard the slogan, "Science is self-correcting," ignoring the question of its veracity or whether the slogan applies to other fields of intellectual endeavor, such as politics, and focus on how it must necessarily be true that any proposition in need of correction is false. So science contains at least some falsehoods. I use the word in its dry, logical sense, which does not necessarily imply lie, a deliberate falsehood. These may be there, of course, but there are also honest mistakes. At any rate, if science did not contain falsehoods, it would not need self-correction. Our last and most important word is self-correcting, not outsider correcting, not uncredentialed correcting, not anything else but self. When the slogan originated, not much thought was given to that word. It seemed clear that later scientists coming across the work of earlier scientists corrected, they thought and hoped, the falsehoods in the earlier work. Scientists correcting scientists. With me so far? Briggs continues. Now look at this headline from Ireland of a kind increasingly common. Social media companies should be forced to take down false content or be fined. This report, incidentally, is part of the Online Safety and Media Regulation Bill, SAFETY. This headline begs the question, what is false information and who gets to decide truth and falsity? Who gets to decide is easy. You won't be surprised to hear the answer either. Experts given power in our expertocracy. What is false is that which is counter to any expert consensus and is a proposition of political interest. You may disagree, say, with the expert consensus on Bigfoot's existence, but since nobody politically cares about this, your belief is not officially false. You cannot, on the other hand, disagree with the expert consensus on COVID vaccine harm. If you do, and you have a sizable audience, and your false opinion reaches the ears of experts, you will be canceled. You can survive by criticizing the politics of vaccine mandates. Rail against those as much as you like. You cannot survive if you criticize the science of them. The very word misinformation confirms the expertocracy. It confirms there must exist an official approved truths list. And, oh yes, let's talk about the Uniparty, but first I will go back to the chat. William Hicks says, okay. Yes, he mentioned something about boosters. Hello to Red Sulfur, Don Willis. Chogokin666 says the atrocities the scientists have heaped upon the world may outweigh their beneficial discoveries. Well, yeah, there is that. Science has been wrong about many, many things. One of my favorites, for 50 years, the experts, the scientists told us about the dangers of saturated fats. Saturated fats were deadly. They were killing people. Great many people, millions of people. It turns out they were wrong. They were completely wrong. And what they advocated instead, in fact, led to the deaths of many more millions of people. Basically, the experts got us to shift from fat, which is good for us, to sugar, which is not good for us. Oh, and things like palm oil and the like, polyunsaturates. Yo Mama says, I suggested long ago that priests should use holy water on Pride Parade routes. Something like that has happened in Poland, I believe, and I think more than once. Kontiki Roulette says, what has shocked me about this whole business is how half the population are completely hollow and soulless wage slave pay pigs. David Wright says, the problem with Odyssey is no TV app viewing, tablet and computer only. Oh, well. TV app viewing. I wasn't familiar with that. Emmett Kelly there says, we must liquidate the wreckers. Hello to Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator. Thank you for your service. And he notes that I already have a Odyssey account up and is at the.KMG.show. And if you want to see the videos that I have there, then you go to odyssey.com and then /@the.KMG.show:2. Send all confiscated excess alcohol to KMG, says Dr. A Dead Name. Okay. Bottle shops did stay open in Australia. Talk about priorities, said Tim Humphreys. Well, no, I mean, it's arguable that the sale of alcoholic beverages is not essential, unlike groceries. However, the politicians decided they weren't going to risk that. They were not going to risk that. Yes, William Hicks reminds us that the Centers for Disease Control has changed, just in the last month or 6 weeks, the definition of what a vaccine is. But of course, the CDC is run by experts, so the CDC is correct. Chogokin666 mentions Peter Duisberg. Peter Duisberg was, he had his career ruined. He was one of the top virologists in the world for his skepticism on HIV being the cause of AIDS. There's a lot of good literature on this. Let's see, Tom Bethel wrote a lot of great stuff, which you can find on the internet. So did Celia Farber. Basically, we're supposed to believe that HIV acts unlike any other virus because there's so little of HIV that they can't even test for it. They have to test for antibodies. And apparently HIV, it migrates to the base of your spine and just sits there dormant, which is not the sort of thing that a virus typically does. But of course, the experts determined, well, actually, Margaret Heckler, who was Reagan's Secretary of Health and Human Services, she decreed that HIV was the cause of AIDS. And since she's a government bureaucrat, well, actually not really, cabinet minister. But anyway, that's actually what happened. I mean, it's not, politicians are not supposed to make those kind of scientific decisions, but Heckler did. And as Tom Bethel said back in the 80s, that AIDS seems less of a disease and more of a government program. Hello to Kyle Free, and my Trail of Disgrace says Odyssey's automatic archiving and or updates of your YT channel looks like it might have missed some episodes, not including banned ones. Think there is a manual option to select individual EP episodes. Well, I'll tell you what happened. That when I selected to migrate them, it said this may take several days, and I thought it's not going to complete because at some point there's going to be a power outage, or Microsoft is going to decide to update Windows 10. And I believe the latter is what happened. And so it just stopped. My Trail of Disgrace adds BitChute also has a free YT channel archive option. So if you create a channel there, you might pick up some viewers there. Well, thank you for that. Let's talk about the Uniparty. This is an article in the Tablet. Once again, it's the Jewish tablet, not the Catholic tablet. It's called The Bush Restoration by Michael Lind. The populist wave is receding, leaving neoliberal elites in charge of both parties and a beleaguered working class out in the cold. By restoration, I mean the return to power of establishmentarianism, Republican right neoliberals and Democrat left neoliberals, who together comprise the American ruling elite, at the expense of Democratic progressives and Republican conservatives. Following the populist upheavals of 2016 to 2020, American politics is reverting to the pattern of 1992 to 2016, when moderate pro-business Democrats like Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and moderate pro-business Republicans like the two Bushes alternated in power while squelching the voices of the American majority. Moderate pro-business Democrats like Bill Clinton. Yeah. Just ending the regulation of the banking industry. And of course, Phil Gramm, leading Republican, was pushing this. Because, yeah, let's let the financial institutions gamble with people's accounts. What's the worst that could happen? Lynn continues, the mechanism by which this happens is the American two-party system. If you think of the factions in the two major parties as separate parties, then we have a de facto four-party state. From left to right, the parties are progressive Democrats, neoliberal Democrats, neoliberal Republicans, and conservative Republicans. While their donor bases are somewhat different, with tech and finance leaning toward Democrats, while extractive industries are more Republican, both Democrat and Republican neoliberals are effectively two wings of one party, the neoliberal establishment uniparty. Neoliberal elites tend to move in the same establishment social circles, and their children tend to go to the same Ivy League schools. Most of them would feel awkward talking to working class people of any political persuasion who are not their servants. The heat and noise of cultural warfare over issues like race and wokeness conceals a broad consensus within the narrow class of people whose needs and opinions are actually represented within the American party system. Business class Republicans quietly support Planned Parenthood, while business class Democrats are hostile to unionization, though they may tolerate harmless company unions that act in concert with corporate HR to enforce woke corporate norms. Republican neoliberals quietly and Democratic neoliberals loudly favor gay marriage and abortion rights, and also free markets, deregulation, cheap labor immigration, and offshoring of industry to low-wage countries. They recognize the need for a safety net, but prefer to subsidize low-wage workers through programs like the Earned Income Tax Credit, as opposed to raising the minimum wage or cutting off the supply of low-wage immigrant labor that deprives the least educated American workers of real bargaining power. You know, I took the standard, what would you say, conservative view for decades that raising the minimum wage is a terribly bad thing because you know the reasons. And then one day it hit me that if the minimum wage, were raised to $15 an hour, as I believe it has been, in places in Canada, what that means is that cheap employers who are determined to chivvy their employees, they'll simply have to hire illegals flagrantly. They can't call upon the recent cohort of immigrants from countries where they don't speak English, low IQ, no education or whatever, because $15 an hour, it's not going to be worth it. So that converted me to the cause of substantially raising a minimum wage. Lind continues, it is unsurprising that both left neoliberals and right neoliberals oppose significant increases in taxation on the affluent and rich. During the 2020 presidential campaign, Biden promised not to raise taxes on any households that make less than $400,000. Restoring the state and local tax, the SALT deduction, a taxpayer subsidy to the metropolitan rich who overwhelmingly vote Democratic, is a goal of many neoliberal Democrats in Congress. In contrast to the neoliberals who dominate the U.S. economic and social establishments, Democratic Party progressives and Republican conservatives tend to represent groups which, although not working class, have marginal social and economic power compared to the corporate and bank executives and big law firm partners of the neoliberal establishment. The social base of the unofficial Progressive Party is found among professionals in the career civil service, K-12 and higher education, the nonprofit sector, and elite media. The social base of the unofficial Conservative Party is found among small business owners and the self-employed, some of whom are rich, some of them skilled artisans like plumbers who hire other plumbers. Professionals with graduate degrees and the self-employed are each about 10 or 15% of the U.S. population. There is some overlap among the groups. These two groups may not be the 1%, but neither includes a majority of Americans. Both the professionals and the self-employed proprietors rely on credentials, academic diplomas, and state occupational licenses, respectively, to boost their incomes and minimize competition in their fields. The working class itself is best defined by the level of education, the two-thirds of Americans who lack a BA. If there were a working class party to judge from polls, it would be left on economics, supportive of higher Social Security and Medicare benefits and organized labor, and moderately traditional on social issues. But the multiracial American working class majority has no party, even though it makes up two-thirds or more of the population. The effective disenfranchisement of two-thirds of the American population by the party system is a recent development. Portions, not all, of the working class used to be represented by private sector trade unions, local political machines, and activist churches within the Democratic Party. But with the exceptions of the Black evangelical churches that are important in Democratic politics and the white evangelical churches that are a pillar of electoral support for Republicans, these intermediaries that once magnified working class power have largely ceased to exist or exert much influence within party structures. Electorally speaking, both progressive populism and conservative populism are instrumental frauds. While the educated professionals who define progressivism claim to be pro-union, they would be horrified by the return of powerful private sector trade unions led by the equivalents of Jimmy Hoffa or George Meany, few of whose followers would be likely to share progressive views on late-term abortion or transgender issues or bans on suburban construction and fossil fuels. For them, union organizing is a fun activity for liberal arts college graduates looking for a taste of authenticity, complete with retro Shepard Fairey graphics that will help credential them in their future pursuits as foundation grant makers, political operatives, or leveraged buyout specialists. And here where I disagree strongly with Lind, and I can't, this just seems an editing mistake. It's a gross error. Republican populism is equally fraudulent. So-called, well, I don't necessarily agree with that sense. So-called Republican populists are mostly just culture war grifters in the tradition of Patrick Buchanan. Buchanan can be hardly accused of being a grifter because he sacrificed his very lucrative career on television to say what he believed. And since the 1990s, Pat Buchanan has been railing against unpatriotic American businessmen who do not believe that they are American. They are citoyens du monde, citizens of the world. They owe no particular loyalty to America and are determined to bust Americans, working class Americans, but with illegal immigration, large-scale importation of third world immigrants, and the outsourcing of American manufacturing to the third world. Pat Buchanan is a hero, and he was talking about these issues and their effect on the working class, well, pretty much before anybody on the right or the left. But moving on. As I've noted, the actual base of the pseudo-populist right consists of self-employed Americans who make up no more than 10% of all working-age Americans, not the vast majority of Americans who work for others, least of all the majority of private sector workers who work for large firms with more than 500 employees. For their part, genuine working-class Americans tend to pay little attention to politics and view it as something alien that they cannot influence. Well, that changed to a large extent under Donald Trump. Lind is not very kind to him. He says, not that Trump cared. He delegated power to Javanka and was more interested in pro-wrestling style media beefs and running for re-election than governing. Even if he had been a serious challenger to neoliberalism, his personal circle, Rudy Giuliani, Michael Lindell, Sebastian Gorka, was easily thwarted by the mainstream Republican in-and-outers who joined the administration in order to moderate it, that is, subvert it from within, while loudly broadcasting their intentions to the media to avoid being blackballed. Well, Stephen Miller was not easily thwarted, and under Stephen Miller, there was a substantial reduction in immigration, both legal and illegal immigration to the United States. The wall was being built. The wages of working class Americans rose significantly, such that pretty much the first thing that Joe Biden did, of course, after allowing transgenders back into the military, was to announce that the border was open. Come on in, boys and girls. Americans, poor Americans, are earning too much money. And what does Lind have to say about Never Trump? Which was a scam, of course. The Never Trump movement, while entirely irrelevant to Republican electoral politics, was a very powerful intra-elite instrument designed to make it impossible for Trump to govern by denying him access to the Republican bench, by threatening anyone who took a job in his administration with social and professional ostracism. It worked. I could point out that going back to the 1990s, largely influenced by Pat Buchanan, I coined the term the government party. Because certainly before Donald Trump, and it remains the case in Canada, there was no difference at all between the Liberals and the Conservatives in my country, and there was no difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. They're just posturing. They're both the government party. And anyone who stood against the government party, well, as Lind mentions, was going to be, made an unperson. And of course, what happened under Trump in his first term was that, oh yes, Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell want this. They want their tax cuts. So, okay, I'll let them have their tax cuts, and then they're going to do something for me. And Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell's response was go to hell. I think that Trump learned a lesson from that. Of course, Paul Ryan is gone from the U.S. House of Representatives, and I'm not as pessimistic as Lind is, for the reason that we keep seeing people like Adam Kinzinger announcing that they're not going to run for re-election. I don't know. It's not even perhaps so much a case that they're terrified of, being primaried out, but they just don't want to hear all the mean words that are going to be said about them and said to their face. Look at Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney has it's just been an avalanche of insults and mockery and statements of pure hatred directed toward her, because she is seen as a traitor. And that's got to hurt, particularly since politicians are so thin-skinned these days. Remnant posting at Substack wrote November 3rd, how anti-woke influencers enable wokeness. Lots of people are voicing their opposition to woke politics, but how much of a resistance are they really putting up? Woke politics have been pushed so far into mainstream political discourse that the topic has become unavoidable, not only because of its advocates, but also its most vocal opponents. The negative attention has become a real problem for the political left. A cottage industry of anti-woke content has arisen over the course of the past decade, becoming nearly as ubiquitous as wokeness itself. At a campaign event for failed Democratic candidate Terry McAuliffe, Barack Obama described culture war discourse as fake outrage. Yes, he would know, because this is the same Barack Obama when, raising funds during a presidential campaign, from millionaires and centimillionaires and billionaires. He described Americans as those pitiful people clinging to their guns and their Bibles. Our author continues, Obama isn't usually one to eschew culture war a dialectic. He's famously waded into social activism on numerous occasions. The real reason for his condemnation of culture war nonsense should be obvious: political expedience. On the left, the backlash to these issues has fomented political anxiety, so it's only natural that left-wing politicians would try to downplay controversial issues, such as the apparent cover-up of student sexual assaults by the Loudoun County School Board. Many career anti-woke commentators also feel anxiety over negative attention directed at the left, rather than momentarily downplay it for political expedience. These people have adopted a posture of opposing the issues entirely. But do they really? When we look closer at the motivations of certain anti-wokes, it becomes clear that they're not really against the left. They're just ashamed of it. The effect of this temporary embarrassment on serious opposition can range from simply producing weak results to outright sabotaging the efforts of others but it always serves to confuse the culture war discourse. Simply being ineffective isn't the worst sin imaginable, but it's worth covering in brief, if only to better recognize it. One hallmark of contemporary embarrassment is the "why I left the left" routine, a supposed renunciation of one's left-wing views. The preeminent example of this phenomenon is Dave Rubin's aptly titled video, "Why I Left the Left," hosted by PragerU in early 2017. Rubin, an alum of left-wing outfit The Young Turks, briefly lays out some basic points for us. The left is no longer liberal. I am actually the tolerant and open-minded one. I thought leftists cared about oppressed people, but now I think that they're the real racists. The left is against the open marketplace of ideas. If we just have a reasonable conversation, we can all get along. The problem with these points is that they don't actually oppose the left's moral frame and instead come off more like attempts at tone policing or one-upping. I am more sensible about being left-wing than those other lefties over there. I'm uncomfortable with their ways of expressing these ideas. I think that this is absolutely true. Our author continues, we can see these ineffective strategies at play in a recent exchange between Brett Weinstein, another anti-woke, and a group of leftist activists on a voice chat app called Clubhouse. Weinstein, himself an avowed left-winger, was once a professor at Evergreen State College in Washington. After criticizing changes to the school's day of absence tradition, the day of absence is white people were told to stay off the campus. Weinstein was ousted by threats from activists in early 2017. Apparently, Brett hasn't learned much from his attempts to have reasonable discussions with the activists at Evergreen or his subsequent foray into anti-woke commentary. When challenged to explain whether or not he's anti-racist, transphobic, or anti-black, Weinstein begins by immediately buying into the rhetorical frame, entering the leftist funhouse of emotional blackmail and magic words. Quote, "I'm not a classical liberal, I'm an actual liberal, far left. I've been my whole life, basically, thoroughly anti-racist by any normal definition, but I don't like Kendi's definition of anti-racist. It doesn't make sense to me. I'm not, by any stretch of the imagination, a white supremacist. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure I even qualify as white. I'm Jewish," unquote. The conversation goes on like this, with the activists eventually claiming that evolutionary biology, Brett's own scientific discipline, is equivalent to eugenics, and demanding that Brett should Venmo them money even as they berate him. Weinstein remains on the back foot the entire time for one simple reason. All of these activist talking points are, at some level, concerns for Weinstein himself. So instead of arguing against the claims themselves, he ends up quibbling about the best way to address their grievances. For Weinstein, there's no question that systemic racism is real. He just isn't comfortable with the way woke people talk about it. Yes. Yeah, you have to keep the frame. Systemic racism, just mock it. Racism itself, mock it. Racism is something that is undefinable. If you want to talk about racial prejudice, well, it would be easier to come up with an actual definition for that. But racism, again, as Ron Unz pointed out, you just replace that with witchcraft or voodoo, or booga booga, and it means exactly the same. So again, that's an excellent essay at remnantposting.substack.com. And where are we now? Oh, there's a piece at Chronicles Magazine by F. Cooper Adamo titled "Remembering Erich von Kuhnelt-Leddihn." I've spoken of him in the past. I reviewed on the Old Book Club his book Leftism, which you can find free, actually, on the internet. Well, the first edition of it, at any rate. And Kuhnelt, he was... I greatly admired him. Of course, Buckley, William F. Buckley Jr., is mentioned in this essay. When actually Kuhnelt-Leddihn, he fled National Review for Chronicles. In fact, many of the people associated with National Review fled it for Chronicles. And when Kuhnelt-Leddihn died, Bill Buckley gave him a typically pissy obituary. Oh, well, yes, I'm supposed to say something kind about this decades-old colleague of mine, but he never really, understood what was what. Just absolutely embarrassing. Absolutely embarrassing. Buckley was a creep, social climber, largely a fraud. Another piece from Chronicles by Paul Godfrey. Youngkin won by campaigning on cultural issues. Yeah. Actually, he won by employing the sailor strategy, which is, as I have described it, grazing where the grass is, by increasing his share of the white vote. And the famous datum that we have seen amongst women, white women, who do not have college degrees, Youngkin won 75% of the vote. There's a lesson there, there's a lesson. And let's see whether Republicans remain too stupid to learn that lesson. Let's move on to at the halfway point, let's move on to my own benighted country, the Kingdom of Kitsch, that is Canada. And the flags are going up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down. This is from Christian Pass Lang at CBC News. Flags on federal buildings now flying at full mast will be lowered again to honored veterans. Well, let me look out my window and check on that. It's too dark to see the military building half a mile down the street, because I saw them fiddling with the flag. I passed by it, the armory, and I saw someone fiddling with the flag. It must be very confusing. Canadian flags on government buildings, including the Peace Tower in Ottawa, are now flying at full mast for the first time since May the 30th. Well, they weren't when I passed this afternoon. After being raised at sunset on Sunday, they will be lowered and raised again to mark both Indigenous Veterans Day and Remembrance Day this week. The flags will then continue to fly at full mast after Remembrance Day. Indigenous Veterans Day is marked on Monday, while Remembrance Day is held on Thursday, November the 11th. Indigenous Veterans Day is something that, I don't know, 37 Canadians had ever heard of before last week. And you see what's going on here. Remembrance Day, November the 11th, is the real national Canadian holiday when we celebrate our achievements, military achievements. But no, the Indians have to have their own, because they can't take part, in ours, because Canada is such a corrupt, genocidal country, whatever. The flags were first lowered to half-mast following the discovery in late May of more than 200 unmarked graves at the site of the former Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia. This is a lie. This is an outright lie. X-ray examination showed disturbed ground. And this figure of 218 was used, including children as young as 3. What would 3-year-olds be doing at a school, at a residential school? There's been no exhumation. This isn't unmarked graves. This was a pit. Okay, that was the idea. We don't know. We don't know what's in there, because the Kamloops Indian Band is not going to allow an exhumation, because it would be, quote, disrespectful. It's a scam. Indigenous leaders have said lowering the flag is a symbolic gesture that needs to be paired with real action. Yes, Gibbs. Lots more Gibbs. Yes, kitsch. To be young, gifted, and Indigenous. This is at rover.substack.com. Jen Jeffries on Carey Price. Content warning. This essay makes mentions of Indian residential schools. I don't know that it's just too much. It's too much. Please know that it is okay to not be okay. Yes, an adult actually wrote this and put it on the internet. The Indian Residential Schools crisis line is available 24 hours a day for anyone experiencing pain or distress. Please do not hesitate to call if you need help. You see, because this is transferred somehow physiologically over generations. You know about this, right? Yeah. So you're a grandfather or great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather was at a residential school, and something supposedly bad happened. Not that there's any proof of it, but that means that you suffer. It feels like the whole world stopped on October 7th. No, it didn't. No, it doesn't feel like that. And if you feel like that, Jen, there's something wrong with you. When news broke that our stoic puck thwarter, yes, an actual adult wrote this, would be hanging up his skates to enter the NHL's player assistance program. Carey Price had just led the Montreal Canadiens to an improbable Stanley Cup run, playing with incredible resolve in the face of long odds, shepherding the Montreal Canadiens within arm's length of victory. As Montreal staved off elimination, news surfaced that the remains of hundreds of little ones, kitsch, some as young as 3 years old, not bloody likely, had been discovered at Kamloops Indian Residential School. Many more unmarked graves would be confirmed as the Habs advanced further in the postseason, offering clear and undeniable vindication for Indigenous peoples whose blood, sweat, and tears went largely unheard in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's final report, an historic categorical documentation of these genocidal state and church-run institutions and the violent settler colonial impact they continue to inflict on Indigenous communities today. I wonder how Indian by quantum, blood quantum, Jeff, what's her name again? Jen Jeffries. Because I saw a picture of her with her mother, who's a blonde woman, clearly not an Indian. Certainly under 50%. Under 50%. But we don't want to go into that because it sounds too much like, Nuremberg, 1937. That's what it sounds like. But if people are claiming privilege, because that is what they are claiming, based on ethnicity, shouldn't they be forced to prove it? I mean, it wouldn't cost all that much to do a 23andMe for everyone in Canada. Wouldn't cost all that much. Then we could determine who gets the Gibbs for being so-called Indigenous and who doesn't. I mean, we're all in favor of science, aren't we? Aren't we? Okay. Price, whose grandmother is a residential school survivor, just like a Holocaust survivor, had to navigate this traumatic moment while literally carrying, get it, his NHL team. Overnight, it felt like the entire country, oh, shut up, was turning to this 33-year-old man for comment, advice, and unpaid, wait for it, emotional labor. Fast forward 3 months, and Price had justifiably had enough. Angela Price, Carey's beautiful wife, mother to the 3 young children, and a successful entrepreneur and social media influencer, released a powerful statement about her husband on Instagram. Quote, "Part of the privilege of being in the position our family is in is that we also get a public platform to show how there is and can be a path to light for anyone who is struggling. No matter what is on the line, we hope we can communicate the importance of putting your mental health first, not just by saying it, but by showing up and doing the work to get better." Carey's showing up for himself and our family and making the absolute best decision possible for us. She doesn't mention that Carey, the goaltender, had a knee operation, very serious knee operation. So it could be that might have something to do with his absence from the ice. Yeah. And it dribbles on and on and on. But wait, let's go to some other idiot here. Someone called Dave McIntyre, who, what does he write about? He writes about, culture? He's a Montreal-based freelance journalist. His primary topic of interest is music, but is equally comfortable writing about sports, current events, and Montreal-related initiatives. Also, dope. Trying out different types of marijuana. Yeah, so he's a pothead. And he has a piece on cult MTL. Carey Price doesn't owe you shit. Yeah, that's what it actually says. That's what it actually says. He doesn't owe any of us anything. Well, he might, owe the team, the Montreal Canadiens, something. Uh, and he might owe the fans of that team something because he is getting paid $2 million a year to play a game. Yeah. But no, he doesn't owe anybody anything. With the Habs and their players, there seems to be a real sense of arrogance and entitlement among much of the fan base when they aren't winning hockey games. Hockey players are not robots you can program to your liking unless you actually coach them. They are real people with real feelings who also happen to be very good at their chosen sport. To treat them otherwise isn't just dehumanizing and lacking in empathy. It also insinuates that their mental well-being is irrelevant and unimportant compared to their proficiencies on the ice. Yeah, that's how it works. Oh, yeah, my wife left me. And yeah, I got a big series coming up against whatever team. But I'm so totally bummed out about my wife, leaving me. So I'm just, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. What about the $2 million or whatever that you're being paid? It's just not worth it. My mental health comes first. Hockey is a man's game, but I wonder for how much longer it will be a man's game. Because after we had Naomi Osaka and others, no, mental health has to come first. And that American gymnast whose name escapes me, these people are trying to feminize sports, all of the sports, and maybe they will be successful. To the extent that they are, they will lose popularity. They will greatly lose popularity, and perhaps we won't have to care about it any longer. And, have you ever noticed, I sound like a hack comedian here, have you ever noticed that the people that are the loudest, most obnoxious, and most energetic activists are also the people most likely to claim that they are perpetually exhausted? Yeah. This is, it took 3 people to cobble together this piece of propaganda that appeared on CBC News November the 8th. Andrea Belmer, Kit Kohlberger, and Jason Vermis. Anti-trans views are worryingly prevalent and disproportionately harmful, community and experts warn. We're exhausted from constantly having to debate our existence, says Alphabet People activist Anna Murphy. You don't sound exhausted, though. That's the problem. Who is debating your existence? Anna Murphy, people like me might think the whole movement is disgusting, and it's an insult to nature and to God. But the fact that trans people exist, who is doubting this? Members of transgender and non-binary communities say they're seeing concerning signs that transphobic ideology is worsening in Canada. Anti-trans sentiments are not new to the country, but several factors make this moment in time fraught, say activists and educators. This despite the fact that the federal government moved to protect the rights of transgender people in 2017 with the passing of Bill C-16, which made gender identity and expression a protected human rights category. So Jordan Peterson, one of the reasons he became famous was his claim that Bill C-16 would make criticism of the transgender ideology a crime. So these 3 people writing for the CBC seem to be complaining, why isn't it being treated as a crime? The climate for trans people has improved in the last decade very considerably, but we're definitely starting to feel some of those waves of anti-trans activism that have really taken hold in the United Kingdom and in the United States in recent years, said Travers, a professor of sociology at Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, BC, who goes by one name. Recent media coverage, including a story by CTV News investigative program W5 and opinion columns published by the Toronto Star and CBC, have been criticized by some members of the transgender community for pushing transphobic ideas and misrepresenting the dangers they face daily, which, according to Statistics Canada, include violence and poor mental health. due to discrimination. The fact about poor mental health is indisputable. As to the cause of this poor mental health, well, I'll let you come up with your own decision. Among the concerning messages, say critics, are assertions that trans people who have not undergone transition-related surgery are not real men or women, or that falsely paint trans women as dangerous men. Similar ideas have been spreading in the UK for years. British author J.K. Rowling, for example, has made comments blurring sex, biological characteristics, and gender, personal identity, to push back against inclusive terms such as people who menstruate, which Rowling sees as an erosion of women's rights. Oh, I see. So J.K. Rowling, she is way out there because she takes the position that replacing the term women with people who menstruate is an erosion of women's rights. No, it's an erosion of their existence, actually. And the trans people are always claiming falsely that, oh, people are trying to erase us, as they merrily go about trying to erase women. And, oh, Dave Chappelle and moan. Yeah, but they're so exhausted. They're so very exhausted. Oh, while we're on the subject, you remember Jazz Jennings? Reality TV star and a poster teen for male to female transgenderism. This is a piece by Lisa Respers France at CNN. A first look at the new season of the TLC reality show I Am Jazz includes the transgender activist struggle with weight gain. In the video featured on TLC's YouTube channel, Jazz Jennings, 21, reveals that her mental health issues led to binge eating and weight gain of nearly 100 pounds. Having all this extra weight, I can't do so many things with my body that I used to be able to do, Jennings says in the video. That also leads to some difficulties with her family. I do experience fat shaming from my family, Jennings says. It makes me feel really humiliated. In the trailer, her grandmother, Jackie, upon hearing Jazz say their typical breakfast consists of fast food, maybe a donut or two, and then maybe 2 bagels, said, I don't judge her by that. I'm just shocked. The first look also includes her parents sharing their concern about how Jennings will transition to attending Harvard, and a scene with her brother Sander going on his first formal date with a transgender woman. How toxic is this family? I mean, did this just happen by accident? And, this is from Kane, a Citizen Free Press. U.S. Navy names military ship after gay rights leader Harvey Milk and is christened by a transgender veteran. There's a picture here that I've seen. Okay, so there's this transgender veteran, and there's some creature in a fake military uniform with a mohawk holding a bag, which seems to have, it's like mocking a cassette player or something, or maybe it is a cassette player. But, okay. Harvey Milk, famous teen groomer, and now Alphabet People icon. The ship was christened by veteran Navy officer Paula M. Nara, who is transgender, and clinical program director for the Johns Hopkins Center for Transgender Health. If you look up Paula Nara, Neira, well, I burst out laughing. Have Paula and Rachel Levine ever been seen in the same room together? Is there a particular kind of permanent wave that these people get? Do they all go to the same hairdresser? And this is rather disturbing. This is from Penny Starr at Breitbart. A 15-year-old girl who reported to school officials and the police in Charlotte, North Carolina, that she was sexually assaulted by a boy in the girls' bathroom has been suspended, according to media reports. Following a 45-minute interview with the victim, who said, I don't want to repeat that, The police charged the boy with 2 counts of sexual battery, but school officials decided to suspend the girl for false reporting. And Alyssa Milano, she's crazy, right? This is from the same source, Warner Todd Houston. Alyssa Milano, appearing on a podcast for People magazine, lamented giving birth because she, quote, wasn't in control. She said that there were too many people involved, and she didn't enjoy, quote, the fact that lots of people had access to my vagina. After going through therapy, after giving birth to Milo, and remembering that one moment of feeling like I was being held down and had things being done to me that I didn't want, to me, was very reminiscent of being sexually assaulted. It triggered all these memories that I thought I had dealt with, unquote. Okay. Assaulted. I suppose increasingly to elite women, pregnancy itself is it's atavistic. You know, it's rather outrageous. This is a little person living inside your stomach. I mean, what century are we living in? And here is a story. A misogynistic attack could derail Kevin Falcon's campaign to lead the BC Liberal Party. So, members of Kevin Falcon's campaign staff, they went to a bar. This is a bar where they found a woman with a strange name. The woman's name is Diamond Issinger. And she tells this story about, she's the campaign manager for a rival candidate. And they were at a bar. But apparently someone told a joke that she didn't like. She objected to the joke. And then someone, a man, yelled at her for 15 minutes straight, yelled obscenities for 15 minutes straight. I don't believe that for a second. I'd also like to know how much alcohol this woman had to drink and what she had to say. But Gary Mason of the Globe and Mail says, believe the woman. In other words, when a woman wants a bunch of men fired, well, then they have to be fired. I mean, anything else, anything short of that would not be justice. James Delingpole writes at Breitbart, he quotes Matt Hancock, I was threatened with public execution after affair scandal. I've read that headline from a tame Telegraph interview with the noisome former health secretary over a dozen times now, but I still can't work out what the problem is. Yes, apparently people are saying mean things about Hancock. Well, people say mean things about politicians. That's part of the price one pays for getting to bully everyone else. And of course, the British government, as mentioned earlier, has in the works a plan to make it a criminal offense to say mean things about politicians. Now, this woman who I mentioned, there is a CBC story about her, a video about her from 9 years ago about this Diamond Issinger, who's a PR spiv, that apparently men were saying mean things. Well, if they're anonymous, how would you know they're men? But some of them were not anonymous, saying mean things about female politicians. And they were making comments about their looks. Perhaps their looks are not so great, or perhaps they are accused of actually seeking political preferment through their looks. Of course, male politicians are never criticized for their looks. No, not Richard Nixon or Donald Trump. Or, I could go on, or in this country, Joe Clark or Preston Manning. Or how about trading on their looks? Ooh, what about dreamy, oh so dreamy Justin Trudeau? Essentially, this is of a piece with all of these other attempts to ban all criticism, first of female politicians, and then just of women. Michael Corrin, who dresses up in his Anglican priest clobber in his portrait photo, because he's a real priest, he's railing against, right-wingers and how very They just got too much power in Canada. They got none. Christians have no power in this country at all. He mentions this woman called Leslyn Lewis, who is a black woman, a lawyer. She has a PhD, or a JD, actually. She calls herself Dr. Lewis, which is not encouraging. Otherwise, she seems rather accomplished. But she has not been included in the shadow cabinet of Erin O'Toole. But if Erin O'Toole gets sacked, which I think is going to happen, Leslyn Lewis would be a strong favorite to win the leadership of the party. Well, she is black. And, this would really own the libs by proving that libs are the real racists. I don't know very much about Leslyn Lewis. It could be that she would be a better leader than Erin O'Toole. But no, I can just see this happening. You can't call us racist because we have a black leader. What? You're still calling us racist? Why are you doing that? Everyone knows that libs are the real racists. People, establishment conservatives simply cannot stop doing that. They can't do it. And, this is from Randy Boswell at Global News. Black Québécois leaders threat to unleash fires of hell over Quebec seat proposal might just backfire. Yeah. As mentioned previously, Quebec is set to lose one seat in the House of Commons because its proportion of the total population of Canada keeps falling. But this is outrageous, apparently, because Quebec is a nation. Fires of hell. What does that mean? Is Quebec going to leave? Bye. I wish you all the best. Sincerely, I wish you all the best. If you are a nation, you should have your own country. But the idea of Quebec blackmail, they continue to blackmail Canada and they continue to get away with it. In more embarrassing Canadian news, this is from David Pugliese at the Ottawa Citizen. Canadian officials who met with Ukrainian unit linked to neo-Nazis feared exposure by news media. A year before the meeting, Canada's Joint Task Force Ukraine produced a briefing on the Azov Battalion acknowledging its links to Nazi ideology. Well, this brings up the embarrassing subject that the Ukrainian government is a coalition between Jewish oligarchs and neo-Nazis. Actual neo-Nazis with military training and guns and numbers. But since Canada was instrumental in the illegal coup d'etat, which brought down the Ukrainian government, it's quite embarrassing. Of course, Chrystia Freeland, who was formerly Canada's foreign minister, had a grandfather who was a top Nazi collaborator. So important was he that as the Germans retreated west, they kept bringing him with him all the way into Bavaria, where he ended the war as an OSS asset. And I know that I know Chrystia Freeland is 1/4 Ukrainian. Of course, there's nothing at all untoward about the fact that Chrystia Freeland's mother was one of the authors of the Ukraine's constitution, and Chrystia Freeland and her sister own an apartment in Kiev. Dual loyalty? No, what are you talking about? What an outrageous charge. I rather fear the prospect that Chrystia Freeland will become Prime Minister of Canada after Justin Trudeau leaves, because she will somehow contrive to get Canada into a war with Russia. And let's see, I'm going to be talking about succession in a minute. You all know about what happened at Houston at the Astroworld, but oh no, there's conspiracy theories. This is from Luke Kenton at the U.S. Sun. We were in hell. Crazy Astroworld conspiracies about Satanism at Travis Scott concert rage as fans slam show's demonic energy. Crackpot conspiracy theorists have sensationally claimed that the tragic deaths of 8 people at Travis Scott's hellish Astroworld concert last week came as part of a satanic blood sacrifice. Scott staged the event in his hometown of Houston, Texas, Friday night, but the concert ended in tragedy when the crowd of around 50,000 people suddenly surged towards the stage, crushing some attendees. Yeah, why would they suddenly surge? Does that have anything to do with Travis Scott whipping them on, just like the singer of Limp Bizkit, when things were getting out of hand at Woodstock '99, started a song called Break Stuff? The design of the stage and production has also come under fire for perceived references to the occult. Conspiracy theorists believe a t-shirt worn by the star shows people becoming demons after walking through a portal. Well, guess how you got to this show in Houston? By walking through a portal. Oh, but nothing to see here. To support the ludicrous claims, conspiracy theorists are citing a series of proofs, including so-called hidden messages on a t-shirt worn by Scott, and apparent occult symbolism in the design of the stage and in promotional material for the event. Others pointed out that attendees entered the stage through the mouth of a large sculpture of Scott's head, which is a perfectly normal thing to do, likening it to the famous Christ in Limbo painting by Hieronymus Bosch, which depicts the mouth of hell. Now, if you see them side by side, okay, it doesn't look all that weird or crackpot at all. We know that Jay-Z is well known for his involvement in the occult. And there's that woman, is the one with the flowery name, I think it is, who sacrifices chickens. She's a voodoo practitioner, and she sacrifices chickens. Yeah, how about that? Oh, but experts told The Guardian that the viral misinformation illustrates how young social media users are increasingly susceptible to fringe conspiracy theories. We have this stereotype of conspiracy theorists being older people on social media, but young people can in some ways be more susceptible, said Jennifer Stromer-Galley, a professor studying social media platforms at Syracuse University. Okay, so once again, we're into the Schrodinger's cat view of the world, that Satanism exists. We have a church of Satan. Witchcraft exists. We have all these women who claim to be witches, the good kind. On the other hand, none of that exists. Yeah. In other words, it doesn't exist, and it's a good thing that it does. And, oh yes, the mom of the skirt-wearing teen who was supposedly raped, she blames it on the rapist, the accused rapist, has blamed the girl. She could have fought back. Yeah. You may have laughed when I told you that feminism was over, completely over, that the trans movement had simply destroyed it. So here we have an ally, an alphabet people ally with a rainbow mask and stars and Black Lives Matter on her tank top, saying it was the girl's fault because she could have fought back. Oh, and by the way, the buggery, that was just kind of a mix-up. The girl got flipped. Yeah, she said that too. And, okay. I think I'll talk about Microsoft tomorrow. How about Kamala Harris? I mean, is she bonkers? Is she seriously deranged? This is from Joshua Klein at Breitbart. Harris asked NASA if it could use its satellites to track trees by race in various neighborhoods as part of environmental justice during a recent display on climate change, leading many to ridicule the vice president online and even giving rise to a Black Trees Matter hashtag. Well, I've seen the video, and you think it's made up, right? It's not. It's not made up. NASA should be tracking trees to chart environmental justice. And I think I'll talk about the windowless dorms at UCSB tomorrow as well. Let's talk about Succession, episode 4 of the 3rd season, where we're introduced to a new character, well, a star, or an actor that was once a star. makes a first appearance. It was called Lion in the Meadow. I'll have an explanation of what that means. And so we have this fellow who owns 4% of Waystar Royco. And he is understandably rather put out by everything that's going on in the company and wonders whether he should transfer his shares to Stewie and his partner and their takeover, their hostile takeover bid. And we find that the Roys may be, really obnoxious people, which they are, but there's many other obnoxious people in big business. And we meet one of them who, well, I suppose this sadism, it seems to be a regrettable but natural form of human expression. Oh, that you only own 4%, but they need your 4%. So how about making them jump through hoops? How about making an 80-year-old man and his son jump through hoops? Well, specifically, taking a helicopter to a private island, his private island, Adrian Brody's private island, because that's the only way you can get there. And then let's force this 80-year-old man, or however old he is, to walk on uneven ground, to walk up a hill, like maybe he'll die and solve the problem, because this actually happens. Oh, and of course, Kendall rages at his father. It seems that they legitimately hate each other's guts now and are not bothering to hide it, at least in person. That Logan made some comment that being on this private island, our 4%er, would be far away from his coffee and bagel places, which Kendall decided was an anti-Semitic remark, stretching it a little. But Kendall is just, he's so full of himself in this season that he doesn't recognize that Greg the egg, is a very weak person who almost always agrees with the last person who speaks to him. For instance, when his grandfather promised him, $250 million in his will, and Granddad isn't going to be alive for that much longer, Greg was cornered in a washroom by Logan, who said, well, do you want to be with Uncle Fun or Grandpa Grump? Okay, I'll be with Uncle Fun. Like that $250 million, that was pretty much a lock. So you're going to trade that in for a salary with a company which, might not be around in its current form for much longer. And so Logan wants to meet Greg, and Greg goes along. Oh, but he's a sturdy birdie, he says. One of his many strange expressions. And of course, he folds almost immediately. And Logan asks him if he wants a drink, despite it being rather early in the day. And Greg comically asks for a rum and Coke, which involves considerable embarrassment as Logan yells out to a servant to bring a can of Coke because, they have the fancy bar there. But I don't think there's a lot of rum and Coke being consumed. So a special can of Coke has to be brought out. And you see Greg it's like he's holding on to this glass for dear life. And it's as if he's never had liquor before. Oh, this is very strong, he says. And then so, he agrees. He signs on the dotted line to be with Team Logan, and then he still has half a drink left. And okay, well, you don't have to finish it. We've seen, I mentioned this with regard to last season, and we see it again. I don't know what it is. Perhaps it's a Puritanism in me that I keep seeing these spreads, including lobster, freshly cooked lobster which are just ignored. Hundreds or thousands of dollars worth of food, which are just ignored because it's like garnish. You don't eat the garnish, right? And these incredible spreads are just garnish. It would be gauche. And I found myself thinking, well, maybe they'd let the staff eat the food, right? Because it'd be rather wicked to throw it away, wouldn't it? Anyway, so Josh and he wants some sort of guarantee from Logan and his son, who have agreed to put up a united front against the takeover bid. And that wasn't going to work out very well. And what kind of guarantee is he going to get? There's nothing that they could say that would really mean anything. Of course, they offer him some things. They offer him some things, but they can't really guarantee that it's not going to go all J.G. Ballard. And Shiv is supposedly president of domestic operations, and it turns out that nobody likes her. Nobody likes her because she has no experience in business. And of course, she is trading on being a Roy and being female. And they're not even bothering to hide the fact that they don't like her and don't really respect her opinion. And her husband is not very fond of her because of, the adultery and the suggestion of a threesome. And now she brought up cheating on their wedding night. And he's not really bothering to hide it anymore because she's ordering him around like a flunky, ordering him to interfere in the editorial operations of their TV station, which doesn't go over very well with their star host. And Tom is thinking a lot about prison. He said he was willing to go for prison. He's going to be the fall guy. And it's very sad. He's investigating prisons is what he's doing. And he has his favorites, this prison in upstate New York, which is popular with Jewish criminals. And I found out recently that a Jewish correspondent of mine sent me some information. Jews in Otisville no longer protected by Shulam, blog written by attorney and former Otisville or still their inmate. He writes the inside scoop on religious Hasidic inmates and life there. In this one, he mentions Mike, the situation from Jersey Shore, doing time there. He is, Tom Wapskam's going to go to prison, it seems, and he likes Otisville because, he's not Jewish, but they got kosher snacks in the vending machines. I guess he's just looking for a prison where he's less likely to be, raped or shanked. And he takes out his terror on Greg in one of these weird homoerotic scenes that we got in season 1, where he wants to fight him, wrestle like chickens, he says, and Greg, thinks that poor Tom has lost it and he's close to losing it. And he says, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. And Tom is furious because he thought that they were friends. And then he tells this terrifying story, which may or may not be true, because how much can you trust Suetonius and the like, that Nero murdered his wife and then took his favorite slave, castrated him, made him dress up like his dead wife, Poppaea, and then married him. And Tom told Greg that I would castrate you and marry you in a second, which I suppose is supposed to be an indication of friendship. But who wants friends like that? let's take a look at the chat. Is Tom a closet case, says Palcasso 88. I thought that in season 1, but he seemed to have dialed it back. But here it is back again. I don't know. I mean, he seemed to be, quite attached to his wife and to be, quite sexually attached to his wife. Perhaps the fact that he believes that his wife is, betrayed him. I don't know. Maybe he really didn't have much to do with women until, he met Shiv. So, maybe he's just off women completely now. I don't know. Halper says, is KMG's voice slightly distorted, or is my system on the fritz? I haven't heard anyone else complain about that. It could be true. Texas Feral Hog says, my grandma used to sacrifice chicken. She'd do several at a time. Grab the head, twist the neck, chop off head. Next is feather plucking ritual, then singe ritual, then the entrail readings. Really? Really? You're just slaughtering? Dr. Deadname says, I have never met native blacks who were into the occult, only a few from the Caribbean who were into voodoo. Oh, I see. Dr. Deadname has spelled voodoo in the new approved manner. VOODOU. It used to be just O's. Now there's U's there. It's funny. I learned when I was a child that my father liked eating chicken. He didn't like seeing uncooked chicken parts, on the counter, prior to being cooked. This really put him off. And then I found out that this is kind of a mystery, because he largely grew up in Quebec, in the Outaouais, but he never talked about it. Never talked about it. And this was on a farm. And one of his jobs as a boy was to kill chickens, by garroting them or breaking their necks. And so he liked to eat them, but not to kill them. Oh, respectful. Respectful spelling. KMG, asked Palcasso 88, why is the lawyer avoiding you? I don't want to go into too much detail about this. It could be just bigger fish to fry, Could be that. And your father was right. Chickens are repulsive to look at, says Ann Run. I want to talk briefly about the cult of the performer. If you were a casual classical music fan these days, you might think that, say, Long Long. Yes, I know his name is spelt Lang Lang, but that's the pinyin for you. It's pronounced Long Long. Is the greatest figure in the history of music. He's just a performer. He is a virtuoso pianist, but there were virtuoso pianists before Long Long, and there will be virtuoso pianists after Long Long. Anthony Burgess, who was not only a novelist, an essayist, and a poet, he was also a composer, a classical composer, who had his works performed at Indiana University, where he held a position. He once said something to the effect that Rostropovich, the great Russian cellist, will be dead one day. He said that obviously when he was still alive, but Bach's cello suites will still be there. This is a very important point. If you look at the sleeves of classical records, they have been for decades now been dominated by the performers. I'm sure there's lots of people who recognize the face, say, of Herbert von Karajan, who've never listened to any record he ever made, because his face became so ubiquitous. And the reason that they made so much, Deutsche Grammophon and EMI made so much about Karajan's face, because he had a very handsome face. He looked like he'd been to the mountaintop, as they say, and not come down empty-handed. And you see this sort of, same visage, noble visage in Leonard Bernstein, And I joked, I was talking about Bernard Haitink, the great Dutch composer who recently died, that Phillips kept putting his head, portraits of him on his records, and he was not a heroic looking fellow. I mean, he did a couple of Mahler series. You could have, put pictures of Mahler up there, or, Vienna, circa 1900, that sort of thing. Now, of course, they've been selling, the classical music has long sold beauty, But the difference was, you look at someone like Elizabeth Schwarzkopf. She was not only a great beauty, she was a great artist as well. Now, I have several recordings by the violinist Arabella Steinbacher, who is half Japanese and half German. And she's very easy on the eyes. And I'm thinking of a Russian territory. What's her name? Isra. Yeah, hang on, I had it there. Ramova, blonde woman, despite her name. Very, very attractive woman indeed. And I guess that would explain, I don't know, rather the fondness for female soloists in recent years. But, performers don't write their music anymore. I mean, Philip Glass is a performer, and he writes music, but I'm just going to go through a list here. I found this from Classical Music, which is brought to you by BBC's Music Magazine, and it's the list of the 50 greatest composers of all time. And number 50 is Rachmaninoff. Well, Rachmaninoff was a famous virtuoso, a pianist. Robert Schumann was a famous virtuoso pianist until he famously injured his hand. He'd come up with some sort of device to exercise it. Boulez, not a great composer, and if he played an instrument, I don't know about it. Hildegard von Bingen, nothing to say about that. Eric Satie, of course, was a pianist. Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, who comes in at number 44. I suppose he was a conductor, Who else do we have here? Harrison Birtwistle, seriously? Come on. Elgar was a pianist. Elgar was an all-around musician, but he became a conductor of his own works, just like Mahler was a conductor of his own works. Richard Strauss was considered one of the greatest conductors in the world. William Byrd, the great Elizabethan composer, was, of course, a keyboardist. And we have Morton Feldman coming in number 34. What? John Cage. Oh, wow. This is really out there. Prokofiev was a pianist. And I mentioned Philip Glass, who has played both acoustic piano and electric instruments. Franz Schubert was a pianist. They had the Schubertiads, where his songs would be performed with him on the piano. And we can go down the list. Chopin is at number 20, despite the fact that he didn't really compose all that much. I mean, he died at 39, which is early, but Schubert died at an earlier age than that. And there are other examples. Of course, Chopin was considered one of the greatest pianists of his time. Steve Reich has been a performer. Brahms was a virtuoso pianist. Someone called Akaya Sariaho, Finnish composer, comes in at number 17, apparently one of the monumental composers of our time. Haydn played all sorts of instruments: a piano, and violin and others. Bach was, of course, a virtuoso organist. My point being, Sibelius, he aspired to be a virtuoso violinist. He was not quite good enough, but he conducted his own works. Benjamin Britten was a good enough pianist in order to be an accompanist to not just Peter Pears, but other top singers. And yeah, I mentioned Mahler previously. The point is that the connection between composition and performance has been busted, and it's not coming back. And I think that the cult of the performer tends to lessen the chance that composition will return, because why do we need new works when we have the 272nd complete Beethoven cycle? I understand why we continue to get Beethoven cycles and Brahms cycles and Mahler cycles and the like. Actually, after all of these works were recorded digitally, there's not really much of an excuse for new ones, because every possible interpretation, including so-called authentic instruments, have been done, and we have Beethoven cycles based on his metronome markings. Well, there's a big debate about that, but what is anyone going to tell us that's new about a Beethoven cycle? And of course, the symphony orchestras, the societies, they play into this, because they're not selling the great works, they're selling the performers. And as much as I admire certain performers, they come and go, and they will be replaced. I haven't mentioned Liszt yet. Liszt was not only the greatest pianist of his day, and he played his own works and others. He invented conducting as we know it. And of course, his works were considered for the longest time largely unplayable. And now we have, all these iron-fingered or steel-fingered pianists, Valentina Lisitsa, to give an example. I mean, she is a fine pianist, no question. She is also a exceedingly good-looking woman. I quite like her, and I quite admire her bravery in political matters. Stephen Harper's government banned her from performing with the Toronto Symphony. Do you know that? Because of her position on the Ukraine. And there was this sustained movement to make her a non-person throughout the world. But thankfully, this failed. So a final look at the chat here. Jim Smith says, according to Wikipedia, Boulez was a pianist but was unsuccessful in auditioning for the piano class at music college. Okay. Was this list only 20th century composers? No, it wasn't. But that Finnish composer, I am familiar with quite a few Finnish composers besides Sibelius. The monumental one that they mentioned, I'd literally never heard of until like 5 minutes ago. Metal Mike says Satie's music is relaxing to me. He also likes Chopin's nocturnes best. Tchaikovsky was on the list. Oh, yes, this is Anne Run. Yeah, I've mentioned that I don't like Tchaikovsky. I'll just repeat. As far as being a tunesmith, there'd be few, if any, that were his equal. It's just posh lust. Just total lack of taste. Just kitsch, Okay. So I used to like always seeing Hélène Grimaud on CD covers. Yes, I wrote a piece about, selling sex. A long piece about selling sex. In fact, RCA had out classics, and they also had Shacking Up with Shostakovich or something. That I'm not making this up. That was That was in what, the 90s, the late 90s? Yes, Hélène Grimaud is a beautiful woman, no question about it. And the fact that she is so beautiful and so talented, it is really remarkable. In fact, there's another example I could point to. What's it? Igramova? No, you got to spell these names exactly right, or it's not going to come up. But there is I believe she's a Dutch violinist, and I'll bring her up here. Yes, Julia Fischer. I'm looking at a picture of here now, of a record of works by Bruch and Dvorak, the Tonhalle Orchestra in Zurich, directed by David Zinman. And there's a picture of her, and I commented at the time, Julia Fischer is a violin virtuoso and a piano virtuoso, and she looks like this. It seems unfair somehow. And I quite like the comment that I got, which was, this was from Bud, it is unfair, gloriously so. Yes, it is. God does not apportion talents equally. So that's it for today. I'm going to be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Coming up on Theater Thursday is David Mamet's film Homicide. And coming up on the book club is the great novel by Robert Louis Stevenson, Treasure Island. If you would like to support this live stream with a donation, gratefully received as always. But, frankly, I could really, really use it now. As I said about, my travails with the estate lawyer, I'm set not to inherit, some outstanding sum of money. I'm not going to be rich, but this would put me out of the persistent fear of being made homeless for, 18 months or so. So if you'd like to make a donation to the live stream, so gratefully accepted. My PayPal account is attached to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations may be made directly to the live stream via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection to ease the burden. Good night.